I was standing there, amidst the flames, holding my 3 children in my arms, when I saw that woman in a blue cloak walking toward us. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't a hallucination born of despair. It was her, as real as you listening to me now, floating a few inches above the burning ground, extending her hands to guide us across a bridge of light that formed in the air. My name is Edward Carter. I'm 42 years old, a carpenter here in Oakhaven, and what I'm about to tell you happened exactly 3 years ago, one December morning that completely changed my life and my family's. Before all this happened, I need you to understand who I was. I'd worked at my father-in-law's sawmill since I was 18, waking up every day at 5 in the morning, returning home at 7 in the evening, covered in sawdust and with hands roughened from years of handling tools. My wife, Lucy, had died 2 years earlier in a car accident, leaving me alone with 3 young children. Peter, who was 7 at the time, Sophie, 5, and Michael, my youngest, who had just turned 11 months old. Imagine the situation. A simple man who barely finished high school, trying to be both father and mother at the same time, working from Monday to Saturday to support his family. We lived in a simple little house at the back of the sawmill, an old building my father-in-law had let me after Lucy's death. It was a humble place, but it had everything we needed. 2 small bedrooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen, and an attic where I had made my little corner to rest on weekends. The walls were made of wood, the roof of terracotta tiles, and in winter it got terribly cold. But it was our home, you know? It was where my children played, where I tried to be the best father I could be. What I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that there was a problem with the house's electrical wiring. Old wires, precarious installation, the kind of thing you put off because you don't have the money to fix it. My father-in-law always said he would call an electrician, but since the house was only lent, we kept putting it off. This negligence almost cost my children their lives. Since Lucy died, I had developed a deep devotion to Our Lady of Grace. I wasn't very religious before, attending Mass occasionally, more out of politeness than genuine faith. But when I found myself alone with 3 children to raise, unsure of how to be a father, I started talking to her every night. I set up a simple little altar in my room with a small statue of the Virgin Mary that I had received from my mother-in-law, and every night, after putting the children to bed, I would light a candle and ask for protection for my family. I prayed for strength to raise my children properly, wisdom to make the right decisions, and above all, that she would take care of them while I worked. Peter, my oldest son, was a child too responsible for his age. After his mother's death, he became my little helper. He took care of his younger siblings, helped Sophie get dressed, gave Michael his bottle when I was busy. Sometimes I would see him playing alone in the backyard, and my heart would ache because I knew he had lost part of his childhood trying to be the man of the house. Sophie was more reserved, always clinging to me, as if afraid that I too would leave. And Michael, well, he was just a baby, trying to understand why Mommy wasn't coming back. That December night, it was unbearably hot. One of those stuffy nights at the end of the year, when the air feels too heavy to breathe. I had put the children to bed early because Peter complained about the heat, and I myself went up to the attic around 11 o'clock. I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed, thinking about the bills I had to pay, the Christmas presents I hadn't bought yet, the 1,000 worries that every single father carries. I remember looking at the altar, at the statue of Our Lady, and saying my usual prayer. I asked her to protect my children, to give me strength for the next day, to keep us united and safe. It must have been around 2 in the morning when I woke up to a strange smell. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's cigarette, but the smell got stronger, more acrid. I got up half asleep, still not quite understanding what was happening, and when I opened the attic door, I was confronted with a scene I will never forget. Downstairs, in the living room, there was an orange glow flickering on the walls. It was fire. The house was on fire.
My first instinct was to run downstairs, but when I stepped on the first step of the staircase, the wood gave way. The fire had started in the electrical panel, where the fuse box was located, and spread rapidly through the dry wooden structure. The flames had already engulfed the entire living room and were climbing the walls, seeking the oxygen from upstairs. I screamed for my children, heard them crying downstairs, but I couldn't get down. The stairs were destroyed. The fire blocked any passage. That's when the despair really hit. I was trapped in the attic, my 3 children were trapped downstairs, and the flames were rising. There was no way to reach them, no way to get them out of there. I started shouting, hoping that some neighbor would hear, but our house was somewhat isolated at the back of the sawmill. The crackling of the fire muffled my voice, and I felt the heat getting more and more intense. I remember looking out the small attic window, thinking about jumping, but it was too high. Even if I survived the fall, there would be no way to save the children. I was completely desperate, feeling the utter helplessness that only a father can feel. It was as if the whole world was collapsing, as if all the effort I had made to rebuild our lives after Lucy's death was going to vanish in the blink of an eye. That's when I remembered the altar. In a kind of reflex, in a desperate need to cling to something, I ran to the image of Our Lady of Grace and fell to my knees. It wasn't a formal prayer. It was a cry of despair. I begged her not to let my children die. I begged her to give me a chance to save them. I begged her to do anything, any miracle that could get us out of there. My tears fell on the image, mixed with the sweat from the unbearable heat rising from below. And it was at that moment, while I was crying and pleading, that something extraordinary began to happen. First, I felt a cool breeze on my face. In a burning house, in the middle of summer, a cool breeze. I looked up and saw that the flames climbing the attic walls had stopped advancing. They hadn't gone out, but they had stopped, as if an invisible barrier were containing them. Then I saw her. I don't know how to explain it properly, because it sounds like something out of a movie, but it was as real as you who are listening to me now.
A woman in a blue and white robe, with the most serene face I have ever seen in my life, floating a few inches above the ground. She wasn't exactly like the image on the altar, but I knew immediately who she was. It was her. It was Our Lady of Grace, there with me, in the middle of the fire. At first, I thought I was delirious, that the heat and despair had made me see things. But she looked me directly in the eyes and smiled. It was a mother's smile, you know? One of those that soothe the soul, that say without words that everything is going to be all right, that someone is taking care of you. Instantly, I felt a peace I can't explain. The panic that was consuming me turned into a strange confidence, as if I knew that somehow everything would be all right. She pointed to the attic window and then down, where my children were. I understood that she wanted me to go to them, but how? The stairs were destroyed. The fire blocked any passage. That's when what still moves me to tears just thinking about it happened. She extended her hands, and from the attic window, a kind of bridge of light began to form. It wasn't an ordinary light. It was a light that warmed the heart, that conveyed protection, that made you feel like you were being cared for by the purest love that exists. Without hesitation, I jumped out the window and walked across that bridge of light. I know it seems impossible, that it defies any logic, but it happened. My feet touched something solid, although I couldn't see anything but a soft brightness. As I walked, I felt her presence beside me, as if she were guiding me, protecting me. The flames coming from the ground floor windows moved away as I passed, as if respecting the light that carried me. When I reached the ground floor, I found my 3 children huddled in a corner of the room, away from the main flames. Peter was protecting his younger siblings. Sophie held Michael in her arms, and all 3 were crying in fear. But the most incredible thing is that around them there was a circular space where the fire didn't reach. It was as if there was an invisible protection keeping the flames away. I scooped my children into my arms and looked up. The bridge of light was still there, waiting for us. I explained to Peter that we were going to climb a special staircase, that he needed to trust me and not look down. I carried Michael in my arms, held Sophie's hand, and Peter held my other hand. Together, we climbed the bridge of light until we reached the roof of the house. From the roof, we were able to jump to the sawmill shed, which was about 6 feet away. That's where we took shelter while the flames consumed our house. I hugged my children, all of us trembling, not from cold, but from the emotion of being alive, of having gone through that together. I looked back and saw that the bridge of light had disappeared, but the feeling of protection remained there, enveloping our family. Peter, who has always been a clever boy, was the first to speak. "Dad," he said, "who was that lady in the blue dress who helped us?" When I heard that, I knew it hadn't just been my imagination. My 7-year-old son had also seen Our Lady of Grace. Sophie, who spoke little at the time, only whispered, "She was beautiful, Daddy. She smiled at me." The firefighters arrived about 20 minutes later, alerted by a neighbor who had seen the flames. When they asked me how we managed to get out of the house, I said we had jumped from the attic window. They were confused because the window was very high and there was no ladder or rope to explain our escape. The team commander, an experienced man, told me it was impossible for anyone to jump from that height with 3 children and come out unscathed. But there we were, whole, protected, saved. In the days that followed, while we were adjusting to my mother-in-law's house, I reflected a lot on what had happened. Had it been real? Had Our Lady of Grace really appeared to save us? The doubts came and went, but whenever I looked at my children, alive and well, I knew that something extraordinary had happened that night. Peter started drawing the beautiful lady who had helped us. Without me saying anything, he drew her in a blue and white robe, exactly as I had seen her. Sophie, who was shyer, would sometimes point to the images of Our Lady of Grace in her grandmother's house and say that she was the woman who saved us. And Michael, even though he was very young, whenever he saw an image of the Virgin Mary, would smile and reach out his arms, as if recognizing a friend. A few weeks later, I went to visit the remains of our house. I wanted to see if anything was left, any object that might have sentimental value. The house had been completely destroyed, but amidst the ashes of what used to be my bedroom, I found something that made me cry. The image of Our Lady from the altar was intact. There was no mark of fire, no sign that it had been through a fire. It was perfect, as if someone had protected it from the flames. At that moment, all my doubts vanished. I understood that what had happened that night was not a coincidence, not luck. It was truly a miracle. Our Lady had heard my prayers, had answered my request for protection, in the only way that mattered, by saving my children. I then decided that we were going to rebuild our lives with a different purpose. I no longer wanted to just survive, working only to pay the bills, raising my children only for them to grow up and go their own ways. I wanted our experience to have a greater meaning, that somehow we could repay the protection we had received. With the help of the community and house insurance, we managed to rebuild our home. But this time, I reserved a special room to be our oratory. I placed the image that had survived the fire in a prominent position, surrounded by flowers that my children pick from the garden every week. Every night, before going to bed, we gather there to thank for the protection, for life, for the opportunity to be together. It's important that you who are watching understand that I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm just sharing what I lived, what my children lived, what completely changed our way of seeing life. If you want to continue hearing stories like this, stories of faith, of overcoming, of everyday miracles, subscribe to the channel. Not because I want views or subscribers, but because I believe that these accounts can touch the heart of someone who is going through difficulties, who is losing hope, who needs to know that they are not alone. Since that night, our family has become closer.
Peter, who is now 10 years old, has decided he wants to be a firefighter when he grows up, to help other families like ours was helped. Sophie, at 8 years old, always participates in the church novenas and has a special devotion to Our Lady of Grace.
And Michael, who is now 4, whenever he passes in front of the oratory, makes the sign of the cross and sends a kiss to the beautiful lady who saved us. My professional life has also changed. I continue to work at the sawmill, but now I have a different purpose. I use some of my time to help other needy families in our community. Along with some friends from church, we formed a group that renovates homes of people in need, always focusing on electrical safety. I don't want any family to go through what we went through, but I want everyone to have the opportunity to know the protection that we knew. People sometimes ask me if I'm sure I saw Our Lady, if it wasn't a hallucination caused by despair and heat. My answer is always the same. I have 3 living children, a rebuilt family, a faith that sustains me every day. If that was a hallucination, then it was the most real and transformative hallucination of my life. There was one episode that marked me a lot, about 6 months after the fire. I was working at the sawmill when a desperate woman arrived, saying that her house was on fire and that her young daughter was trapped in the bedroom. I dropped everything and ran with her to the house. When we arrived, the firefighters were already there, but they couldn't get in because the fire was too strong. Without thinking twice, I offered to help. I knew that type of construction well. I knew where the safest points might be. When I entered the house, I didn't feel fear. I felt that same protective presence from the night of our fire. I managed to get to the girl's room and get her out. She was scared, but okay. When we left, her mother cried with relief and thanked me incessantly. But I knew that the one who deserved the thanks was she who had given me the courage and protection to enter a burning house without hesitation. This episode made me understand that the miracle we experienced wasn't just for us. It was so that I could help other people, so that our experience could multiply into acts of love for our neighbor. Since then, whenever an emergency arises in town, I offer to help. Not out of heroism, but out of gratitude. My children grew up knowing that they are protected by a special love. I didn't raise them with fear of fire or accidents, but with the awareness that there is a greater force that takes care of us. They learned that life is fragile, but that love is stronger than any distraction. They learned that faith is not just believing in miracles, but living in a way that deserves the protection we receive. Peter developed a special sensitivity for helping other children. At school, he always defends his classmates who are bullied, always offers help to those who are struggling. When I ask him why he does this, he replies that the kind lady taught him that we have to take care of each other. Sophie has become a very generous girl, always sharing her toys, always concerned about the well-being of others. And Michael, even though he's small, already shows a natural compassion for people. Today, when I tell our story, it's not to impress anyone or to prove that miracles exist. It's to share a certainty I carry in my heart. We are not alone. No matter how difficult the situation, no matter how impossible the solution seems, there is always a way. There is always a light that can guide us. I learned that faith is not a crutch for the weak, but a strength for those who need to be strong. I learned that miracles don't happen to save us from problems, but to give us the courage to face them. I learned that a mother's love, whether human or divine, is capable of moving mountains, of creating bridges where there are none, of protecting where it seems impossible. There are nights when I wake up and still feel that protective presence beside me. There are moments when I watch my children playing and see in them the reflection of the grace we received. There are days when difficulties arrive, bills pile up, problems appear.
But in all these moments, I remember the bridge of light. I remember the serene smile. I remember the protection that enveloped us that night. Our story didn't end with the fire. In fact, it began there. It began when we understood that we are part of something bigger, that our lives have a purpose, that we were saved not only to continue living, but to live better, to love more, to help more. It began when we discovered that true faith is not believing only when everything is fine, but trusting especially when everything seems lost. Today, when I light the candle in our prayer corner, I don't just ask for protection. I give thanks for the family I have, for the second chance we received, for the opportunity to be an instrument of love in the lives of other people. I give thanks for the most important lesson I learned, that true love never abandons, that divine protection never fails, that there is always a light to guide us home. There are nights when I wake up and still feel that protective presence beside me. There are moments when I watch my children playing and see in them the reflection of the grace we received. There are days when difficulties arrive, bills pile up,